have another book that is also due at the library today, and I just wanted to discuss it real quick because right now it's February 2020, and we're in the middle of exploring ageism against older adults, and also we have this running theme of understanding ableism in children's literature, and this kind of intersects nicely, particularly, and if you know about the book where that guy talks about multiracial people solving racism, mixed, you'll know that how I feel about subtle supremacy couched in very gorgeous, cute books that otherwise have really nice messages, and how dangerous that can be because people pick this up and they're like, it's a really good book. I really want to like this book. The illustrations are gorgeous. The message is wonderful underneath the problematic parts. But that is what makes the book so dangerous because it's going to be a bestseller because it's so cute. So this is Joy by, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, Corinne Avaris and Isabel Falath. And of course everyone's white because it's one of those books. They didn't put that much thought into it. Gorgeous, like really, really gorgeous illustrations. So Joy has, and I really want to draw your attention, the first ever spread is this Fern loved Nana, she loved her butterfly cakes, her mantelpiece mice, and her cat Snowball, and she loves her smile. So Nana is this exuberant, gorgeous, although seated, which kind of feeds into that stereotype. I mean, older people usually do need to sit down, but it does feed into that stereotype. Like, nothing is countering the stereotype of older people and grandmothers as sedentary, cat-loving, benevolent but harmless humans, which is, that in itself is a little bit problematic, but not like a deal breaker. But if you notice all this color, and then on the very next page, intentionally as a contrast, we see this. Now I want you to notice very specifically, there's some cobwebs, everything's gray, she's not smiling, there's some hairs loose, some pictures askew. They're trying clearly to depict some sort of depression or some sort of like a drastic change that has sucked all of the joy out of Nana's life. Nana doesn't have a name either, she's just Nana, because very rarely are older people ever depicted as something other than an accessory to a young person in books like these, which you can kind of understand, except that is a problem if children only think that older people are there to service them as child caretakers or inspiration, that kind of thing. Similar to the way that people with disabilities are only accessories to people without disabilities. So one thing I want you to notice is there's no wheelchair in this picture. It's all cupcakes and butterflies, literally cupcakes and butterflies. And then to illustrate badness and depression and things to be sad about, the illustrator chose to add a wheelchair. The wheelchair has nothing to do with the story. It's just in there as a depressing thing. Like, if your life suddenly got depressing, what kind of things would you pick up? A wheelchair, like, right? This would have been fine. It would have been a completely fine book if the wheelchair had already been in here, right? Like, she can be happy with the wheelchair, happy without the wheelchair. It's just normalizing that she has a disability. It's also a hospital wheelchair, not like a wheelchair that you would actually keep in your home. That would be remarkably uncomfortable, and people don't do that. So, and that's a big problem in children's literature, where wheelchairs are clearly, this illustrator doesn't even know anyone who uses a wheelchair, otherwise they would know. Anyway, so the cat's not taken care of. She's not taking care of herself, her house. She's in a wheelchair. Now this, because there's no background on this, it's just used as a visual shortcut because the illustrator and the makers are actively exploiting stereotypes about people with disabilities to add emotional impact to their story, like a visual shortcut, and they're literally profiting off of that stereotype because it makes it so they don't have to write as much. It makes it so they don't have to be better writers or better storytellers. And that is severely, severely problematic. It's a form of appropriating disability for their characters so that way they can be more successful. So what this also does is it reinforces the narrative to children that wheelchairs don't belong in a happy house, and people who are happy don't use them, but people who are not happy do use them. So it both tells you that having a disability is something to be depressed about, and also depression is linked reversely to disability, whereas like when there's something wrong with you, right? Like you're, not like depression is your brain broken, but there's something going on and it affects the whole of you, like disability and mental conditions are all encompassing, and you can't have those independent. You can't be depressed and also bake. But there are lots of, to use functional language, high functioning people with depression, anxiety, stuff like that. I am a very high functioning person with anxiety who also bake and decorate the house. But they have disabilities. So this is a monolithic, stereotypical portrayal. And it's also showing, because of her age, now nothing in the book also requires that we're talking about a grandmother, but this is a common trope in children's literature where there's a child with an older person, and the older person is depressed, either because they got older or they got a disability or became disabled or they got sick or something like that, or they're, one step closer to death. The child needs to rescue this older person. The older person never does. They literally just sit there the entire book. They don't do anything. There's no self-agency. It's the child is a savior for older people, which is intended to make children feel good about themselves and feel powerful. But what it does is it uses older adults as a footstool and feeds into stereotypes that literally kills them because of internalized bias and medical bias. To make children feel good about themselves. And we can make children feel great about themselves without using older adults as a footstool. So, depression, this is how I'm reading this. I have been depressed before. That's a good visual, except for the fucking wheelchair. It feels like the color's been sucked out of things. Sure, okay. Sometimes I just can't do words. Equivocating the wheelchair with badness. Severe problem. From what I have heard, I'm not a wheelchair user, from what I've heard from wheelchair users, the wheelchair is not a thing you are strapped down into. It is not a prison. It is actually a tool to free yourself. Like, I don't hate my shoes. I don't feel trapped in my shoes. My shoes are a tool that allow me to go walk out on a sidewalk that has tacks on it, right? It's a mobility. I don't hate my car. I really like having, our family has a car and it's very freeing and I feel very trapped when my partner has it. And the wheelchair is not a bad thing. And this using a wheelchair as a symbol for bad things is severely problematic and ableist. So she goes on to talk about why her grandmother doesn't have joy. And the premise behind the story is actually really nice because it talks about how she's going to go catch some joy and bring it back to her grandmother. That's really not a bad idea, is to share good things with people, to be mindful and pay attention to the good things that are happening in the world. But so she's trying to box up the joy of, a puppy or something. She's trying to scoop up joy from the glimmers on a pond, and clearly, obviously, that's not working, and she's working it in her brain. How do you capture that joy in the outside world and bring it to someone who maybe is having a hard time, right? How do you share and share of yourself and help them? And then, of course, she becomes depressed trying to do it, and it doesn't work, which okay. So here's poor sad sack grandma. And she's admitting she can't share her joy with sad sack grandma. So she tells, and this is the part of the story I really like, the idea of telling, sharing, because sharing things and telling people what we know and sharing what's great, that is literally what brings most people joy. Sharing things. Info dumping is one of my favorite things to do with you, and there's a reason why I have a compulsion to do it. It makes me happy. She's sharing it, and we're learning about the power of words and storytelling and how you can share that with people. Now, here's a problem. It's a little bit too fast. It's a magic cure, which magically cures grandma's depression. You see how the color's back in her, and she's happy. These illustrations are so gorgeous, and it sucks that the illustrator is such an ableist piece of shit. But, she's like, I just need you to be you, which is kind of a weird term. I think it's more of like, I just need you to, share good stuff. Anyway, so just to really hit a nail into that saviorism coffin, you have the girl pushing grandma because of course she can't possibly push herself in her wheelchair. You always miss the part where it's like maybe grandma asked for a push or something, but we have a problem where people feel entitled to put their hands on people's wheelchairs, which is a violation. So seeing this all the time in books, it really adds up. Like if it was just once or twice, you could just imply that this was a nice thing that they're doing for each other. But basically this little girl has rescued her grandma. Her grandma is now magically cured from depression because through the power of her joy and youth, and as if grandma couldn't possibly have, over the course of her, I don't know, 80 something years on the planet, couldn't have discovered the idea of how to make yourself happy, how to be mindful and notice birds, and cheer herself up. She needed this small child with 6 years of experience to rescue her because she's too incompetent to actually do stuff. Now, there are great books about how to support someone when they are depressed. There are great books about how to like be there for someone, and listen to them and share good things with them and maybe give them a moment of brightness. But ultimately, if you have a mental health condition, someone can't fix you. That's not like they can't dump some happy words into your mouth and then suddenly you're cured. And that sets up a really nasty expectation for children, because we're telling our children that it's almost their responsibility and they actually have the power. They should feel empowered, but telling them that they have the power to magically fix someone's depression sets them up for some really nasty relationship dynamics down the road, right? Like if you teach people that if you just do the right things and say the right stuff, you'll magically fix the people you love. It doesn't work like that. So here they are, happy because grandma has been cured of her depression. Which was caused by something to do with a wheelchair, or at least correlated with it. But I wanted to share that this is a very common example, and this just happens to be a newer, more gorgeous book. And there are so many books, there's something great about them, like gay grandpas, but they also, and they're so cute, but that shortcut and exploiting stigma against older adults and against people with physical disabilities or even mental health conditions, so that way kids can feel better about themselves. That is a severe problem, and we need to cut it out. Okay, thank you, friends, for joining me, and I'm done with this video now. Thank you.